Hi, friends. Father Kerry Walters here, pastor of Holy Spirit American National Catholic Church, and this is another Holy Spirit moment. This one on the danger of substituting expediency for truth. My friends, I fear that we live in a period in our nation's history in which expediency is supplanting a regard, a fidelity to the truth. What seems to be important for so many of us today is succeeding, regardless of how we succeed. We are beginning to adopt the position, even if we don't actually say it out loud, that the ends does justify whatever means it takes to achieve them. We see this cynical appeal to expediency in the economic realm. We see it in the social and cultural realm, and we especially see it, I want to suggest to you today, in the political realm, where so many politicians are using rationalizations which are expedient in order either to acquire power or to retain power. This kind of expediency, which substitutes getting what you want any way you can get it for truth and honesty and goodness, is not only corrosive of the well-being of a society, but also, I want to suggest to you, is corrosive of our own individual moral characters. Because to imbibe the atmosphere of expediency that surrounds us is to somehow be affected to one degree or another by it. It's astounding to me that this tension between truth and expediency is as old apparently as humanity. 25 centuries ago, the Greek tragedian Sophocles explored it in one of his last plays, a play entitled Philoctetes. The play was produced around 409 BC. That's just a couple of years before Sophocles died. He wrote the play when he was 87 years old. The title character, Philoctetes, is well known in Greek mythology. He was a famous archer who had acquired the bow of Hercules, a bow that had the magical power of never missing whatever target it was aimed at. And so Philoctetes is renowned throughout the ancient world as a magnificent archer. All three of the Greek tragedians, as a matter of fact, Aeschylus, Euripides, and Sophocles, wrote plays about him. They were apparently fascinated by him, but alas, Euripides' play and Aeschylus' play haven't survived. The only surviving play about Philoctetes that has managed to make it to our time is one by Sophocles. And I think that if we examine the play, we can begin to see, because it gives us some distance from our own time and a perspective to look at our own time, just exactly how awful it is to substitute cynical expediency for truth and honesty. Now, the play takes place in the 10th year of the siege of Troy, the 10th and the final year of the siege of Troy. But in order to appreciate the play, you have to have in mind what happened at the very beginning of that 10-year period. Philoctetes is sailing along with the other Greeks to Troy in order to rescue Helen, who has been kidnapped. Along the way, while stopped at an island, Philoctetes is bitten in the foot by a snake. Accounts differ as to how and why he was bitten, but most of them agree that the snake bite was a vengeful act on the part of an angry goddess. The snake bite was obviously poisonous, and it not only causes Philoctetes agonizing pain, but also it corrupts the flesh of his foot, such that a horrible stench always accompanies him. Now, when Odysseus and the other Greeks see what's happened to Philoctetes, they decide they just can't be bothered in taking care of him, and so they leave him, they desert him on an island in which there is no other human being. And he has been on that island in agonizing pain from his wound and dealing with the corrupted stench from the wound for a full decade now. That's when the play opens. Odysseus, a name that I'm sure you're familiar with from the Odyssey, has been told by a prophet that the only way the Greeks are going to win the by now stalemated war against Troy is if Philoctetes joins them with his magic bow. So Odysseus is resolved to sail to the deserted island where Philoctetes was left and bring him and the bow back before the walls of Troy. But he realizes that Philoctetes despises him because he, Philoctetes, remembers what Odysseus did, deserting Philoctetes. And so what wily Odysseus does is to enlist the help of a youth. The youth is no less a person than the son of the slain Achilles. Neoptolemus is the youth's name. His name actually means young or rough warrior. When Neoptolemus and Odysseus get to the island upon which Philoctetes was stranded, Odysseus says to Neoptolemus, now in order to get this guy to accompany us to Troy, we're going to have to lie to him. I can't do it because he'll recognize me, so you, Neoptolemus, are going to have to do it. I want you to spin a yarn that will seduce him into thinking that you are taking him back to his home island when in point of fact we'll Shanghai him and drag him to Troy. Now, Neoptolemus may be a youth, but he's already got a pretty good moral sense. And he says to Odysseus, I would be ashamed to do something like this. I would be ashamed to lie in any circumstance, but especially in this circumstance, to a man who has suffered on this island for 10 years. And Odysseus keeps trying to convince Neoptolemus that in point of fact, the lie would be justified. It is expedient because it will result in an end that Odysseus insists is desirable, the downfall of Troy. Well, it takes a while for Neoptolemus to be convinced of this, but Odysseus is wily, and he has a golden tongue, which he uses time and again in all of the stories that we have of Odysseus to trick people, to lie to people, to bamboozle people in order to achieve what he wants. He is the prototype of a trickster. And young Neoptolemus is eventually convinced that it is bad to lie in general, but in this case, the end does justify the means. And so he proceeds to spin a fantastic yarn to poor, gullible Philoctetes. Philoctetes, who is so hungry for human companionship and so starved with human conversation that he eagerly laps up everything that the youth tells him. It is interesting, but as you progress through the play, you begin to get the impression that Neoptolemus, who initially was reluctant to lie because he thought it a shameful thing to do, actually begins to get into it. And after a certain point, you're not quite clear if he realizes he's lying anymore or if he's begun to buy the elaborate story that he's spinning for Philoctetes. However, at one point in the play, Philoctetes is overwhelmed by one of his periodic bouts of agonizing pain, and he begins to scream and to moan. And it's at that moment where Neoptolemus seems to recover his moral center. He's filled with compassion for this poor man, and he immediately decides that what he's been doing up to this point is shameful and unacceptable under any circumstances. And so he comes clean with Neoptolemus. He tells him what's going on. And of course, Neoptolemus is crushed. He's crushed because the first human he's seen in 10 years is someone who's intent upon deceiving and kidnapping him. At which point Odysseus shows up and he insists that he's going to drag Philoctetes off to Troy, even if Philoctetes doesn't want to go, that lies are good in this particular situation. He's just having none of this compassion and moral compunction that poor Neoptolemus is feeling. So this youth is caught on his position. He will not bend now that he has seen the damage that he has done to Philoctetes. He will insist that he will no longer lie. Odysseus, on the other hand, is caught as well. He will not back down from his expediency. He will not back down from his claim that however we get Philoctetes to Troy, it is okay. So you've got another stalemate going on here, until suddenly the demigod Hercules descends from heaven and sets everything right. He says that Philoctetes has a destiny, and that destiny is to go to the walls of Troy, where his foot will be healed, and where he and his magic bow will re-energize the besieging Greeks to such an extent that they will take the city. End of play. What's going on here? Well, I think Sophocles is giving us several moral lessons, all of which are pertinent to our situation today. The first is this. Lying corrupts us. It's just as simple as that. We may think that lying in some circumstances is not only justifiable, but perhaps even obligatory because of what we hope will result from the lie. But we see with Neoptolemus that to lie goes against his innate moral sensibility, and that moreover, once he begins to lie, the lie that he's spinning in order to seduce poor Philoctetes actually seems to begin to seduce him as well. He actually begins to believe the line that he is telling Philoctetes, even though it's completely contrived. So lying corrupts the liar. It not only damages the victims of the deception, but it also corrupts the integrity of the person who is lying. Truth, when it goes by the wayside, leaves victims in its wake. That's the first important lesson, it seems to me. The second is this. In all societies, at all times, there have been people, like Odysseus, who seem to have no true north when it comes to morality. They are willing to manipulate people who might be either more gullible or more morally pure and innocent than they are in order to try and get them to do the dirty work for them. They will do this through rhetoric. They will do this through publications. They will do this in any media that is available to them. I think today, for instance, of Twitter and YouTube and all of the other social media that have been used and abused in order to manipulate people. Unscrupulous movers and shakers who are willing to say whatever they need to say in order to get people to do their bidding. So the second takeaway from Sophocles' Philoctetes is a warning against these kinds of people. The third is this. These people have no moral center of gravity because even though they may not use the expression themselves, they're moral relativists. They do not believe that there is any objective standard upon which to evaluate their or anyone else's behavior except the standard of success. And that's why they sacrifice truth for expediency. Odysseus is a moral relativist. He doesn't give a darn about any claim that this action is inherently good or this action is inherently wicked. All he's concerned with is winning the game. And he tells us this, as a matter of fact. He describes himself in this way in Sophocles' play. Moral relativism, regardless of how well-intentioned the perpetrator of moral relativism might happen to be, and Odysseus is not well-intentioned, will ultimately destroy truth. And the moment that goes, standards for appraising behavior become so boggy, so wet, that they can be moved any way we want to move them. Here's the final lesson to be drawn from Sophocles' Philoctetes. And for me, it's one of the most astounding and alarming ones. And it is this. Religion is frequently a great tool for the person of expediency who wants nothing more than to acquire power, even at the expense of truth. In several places in the Philoctetes, Odysseus will appeal to religion as a justification for deceiving Philoctetes and kidnapping Philoctetes. He even uses religion as a justification for deserting Philoctetes on that island 10 years earlier. He has the gall to say that Philoctetes had to be left on the island because his screaming in pain and the horrible stench arising from his corrupted foot interfered in worship. It bothered his fellow Greeks as they made offerings on the altar to Zeus. And so it was actually for the sake of the gods that Philoctetes was left behind. Several other places, especially toward the end of the play, Odysseus will make similar arguments, that it is pleasing to the gods that Philoctetes be returned to Troy, even if it's against his will, because the gods, at least some of them, want Troy destroyed. So actually deceiving Philoctetes and or kidnapping him is an act of piety. And finally, there's that strange appearance at the very end of the play of the demigod Hercules, who descends and fixes everything, who resolves this standoff, this stalemate between Neoptolemus, who has discovered his conscience, and Odysseus, who never had one. That particular theatrical move is called a Deus Ex Machina, and it was popular in Greek tragedy, and Greek comedy for that matter. Deus Ex Machina is when a playwright, either because he's too lazy to work out the implications of what he's wrought in the play, or because he just can't figure out how to do it, brings in a god who fixes everything magically, divinely. Now, Euripides uses Deus Ex Machina in many, many of his plays. Aeschylus, much less so. To my knowledge, Sophocles only uses the Deus Ex Machina move in this one play of his. Sophocles just seems to have not had any respect for the slick and easy way out that a sudden rescue god in the form of Deus Ex Machina offers. But he uses the Deus Ex Machina here in this terribly serious play about the dangers of forsaking truth and embracing expediency. Why? I think the Deus Ex Machina is an ironic statement on the part of Sophocles. I think that what he's saying, between the lines as it were, is something like this. Me bringing down Hercules to magically fit this stalemate, this standoff between morality and immorality, is just a facade. It's not convincing to you, the audience. It's not convincing to me, Sophocles, but I'm introducing it here to show you how shallow, how flimsy religious justifications for lying, for dishonesty, for power grabbing simply are. It's a brilliant move on Sophocles' part. I wonder, as I look at our political situation today, what Deus Ex Machina is going to be pulled out in order to justify expediency on the part of politicians, on the part of people striving for economic success, on the part of simple citizens like you and I, whenever we need some rationalization, some justification for a bit of wickedness that we are planning, that we hope will get us what we want. Sophocles would have seen through, however, that kind of a rationalization. He would have seen it for what it is, a use, a misuse of religion, of philosophy, of morality, of culture, of whatever it is that we dress up as a Deus Ex Machina. So my friends, the conflict between truth and expediency has been around for centuries, but I want to suggest to you that just as Sophocles insists in the play that our better natures can win out over the desire for expediency, as witnessed by what happened to Neoptolemus, so the same thing can happen to us today. We need to keep our eyes focused upon that moral sensibility that eventually came to the rescue of Neoptolemus and is able to come to our rescue, because it resides in us today, just as it did in young Neoptolemus 25 centuries ago. My friends, this has been another Holy Spirit moment. Thank you so much for watching. Please live in the truth. Avoid expediency. I will see you soon. God bless.